Happy Sunday, everybody. We are here as promised with Latique Lyles for part 2 of A Grandmother's Love. And we are hoping that your day is going great. And I do just want to, just before we get started here, that this is Latique's lived experience and her experience. So please, let's, respect that and handle that with care. Okay? Latique, if you could just introduce yourself to everyone and let them know who you are.
Okay, absolutely. First, my name is Latieke Lyles. I am 42 years old. I'm a St. Louis native. I've lived here all of my life, been here all of my life. I am married to my husband, John. We have 2 kids. We have a daughter who just turned 15, and our son is 13 years old. So they both keep us very busy. They're both active kids. In addition to being a wife and mother, I am also an attorney as my day job. I work for a large bank, and I work in their in-house department, basically doing litigation and handling the needs of their employees. And outside of that, my work and my family, my kids, I'm also very active in my church. I attend Rehoboth Christian Ministries. I have been there for, I think, going on 17-ish years. About 15 of those years, I have been an ordained minister and leading the youth ministry along with my husband. We are both youth directors at the church, and we've been in that position for a long time as well. So, but that's pretty much what keeps me busy: work, kids, family, husband, and church.
Okay. Thank you so much, Latique, for sharing that part of you. Also, aside from the reason why I thought you would be a good candidate for here at a grandmother's hands, what we do is we provide support to low-income grandparents who are parenting grandchildren. Latique, I want you to just tell us about what age were you when your grandmother was in position to parent you?
So it's a little bit complicated. So my parents had me when at a very young age. They were both teen parents. My mom was only 16 years old, and my dad was 19, although he was not around much at all, and especially in those early years. So it's really just my mom. But because she was only 16 years old, she was obviously still living with her parents, my grandparents, and so even though she was herself a teenage parent. Like my grandparents had a role then because she was a child, raising a child. But my grandmother also was very strict. So she did, especially in those earlier years, try to force my mother to be a mother as much as she could, given, the circumstances. Like she was, still have your chores at home. You need to wash dishes, but you also need to take care of this babe. So my grandmother wasn't parenting me like full time in those first early years, but we were living with her. So she was really providing us with support and obviously a lot of financial support and just the home. We probably moved out. We, meaning my sister, I had a younger sister who was born about 2.5 years after me. Probably moved out of our grandmother's house when I was in kindergarten. So around like 4 or 5 is when we moved out. But it was kind of unstable off and on until like I was in the 3rd grade. So around the time I was 8 or 9. We just had a lot of instability with my mom in terms of, she was young, made a lot of mistakes, and really wasn't in a position to raise us. So when I was 9, 3rd grade, is when my grandmother came and got us permanently. She came and kind of saw the condition we were living in, and she said, "Tell my mom, pack up their things. I'm coming to get them." In a couple of days, and she did. And so from then on, from the time I was around, like I said, 9, and my sister was around 7, we lived with my grandmother permanently. And I did, obviously, until I became an adult myself and moved out of the house.
And with your grandmother, did she have other children? I know she had your mom. Were there other children that she had raised?
Yes. So my grandmother had 5 children. And so at the time I was born, my mom is the second youngest. So my aunt Michelle was also still living in the house. She's a couple years younger than my mom, so she would have been 14 at the time. She was still living in the house. In addition to my mother's brother, the one that's right over her, my uncle Stevie, he was also still living in the house as well. He would have been like 19, 20 at the time, but he was disabled. Steve is he was has always been mentally and physically, but more so mentally disabled. And so he has lived in the house with them for his entire life until they passed away. So at the time I was born, my Uncle Stevie was still living in the house. Michelle was still living in the house, my Aunt Michelle, and then my mom. So in addition to raising, her 5 kids, at the time I was born, she was still actively raising 2 other kids, or well, 3 kids, including my mom.
And so being at your grandmother's house, from when your mom was there and then actually stepping back into the home now, what did you notice like a role difference because now your mom is not there, but now grandma is like full time mom?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It it was a huge role difference. I will say that when my grandmother was just my grandmother before she became my mom, like even when we were like moving out, like it was like she was a grandmother. She'd pick us up on the weekends. I just love spending time with her, love being with her all the time. But she was just like a sweet grandma, like grandmothers that like spoil the kids type grandma. Like that's absolutely what she was. And even though my mom had me at a very young age, my the aunts, they tell the story all the time. Like I wasn't her first grandchild, but I was the first one who lived in her city. My oldest uncle had a couple kids, but they lived out of town. So I was kind of the first grandchild who she had a true like close relationship with. And so like any grandparent, even though you might be disappointed that your child, got pregnant at 16, she was excited to be a grandmother and like doted on me. And so that was my initial experience when she was just grandma. But when she came and permanently got my mom, me and my sister, and had to become mom, that was a huge relationship change because she had to go from, okay, I'm not your grandmother anymore, I'm your mom. And so, and again, her natural personality, she's very strict. She's very, no nonsense. And so it was definitely a big relationship change, I would say, between that time. Yeah.
Do you see that the parenting role, like your mom versus how grandma, was that different?
Yes. Again, my mom was young, so she didn't, she was a kid herself, so she didn't really know how to be a parent, which is part of the reason why my grandmother ended up having to raise us. And so my grandmother, I think she wanted to um accept, like assert some boundaries, like right away, and kind of let me know, like, okay, this is how things are going to be. This is what my expectations are now that like I'm your mother.
Mhm.
Because like I said, to my grandmother's credit, because a lot of times I think grandmothers, when your kids have a child at a young age, they step in right away to try to be the mother. And she really did. She tried to let my mother be a mother, and she really was like hands off, as hands off as she could be.
Mhm.
And she, tried to let her be a mother. She didn't try to really overassert herself. But once she had to become my mother, she did. Like she was like, this is what the rules, this is what the expectations are that you have to live by. And her rules were again a lot more strict than the rules that I was used to with my mother. And it was a lot more structured than what I was used to. I didn't have when we were with my mom, we didn't have a lot of structure. We were in and out of different homes, apartments, even a shelter at one point. So there wasn't a lot of structure. But my grandmother, like there was structure and expectations and chores and just, way that she expected me to behave and all those things. And so it was, like I said, it was a big difference between going from that her grandmother role to the mother role, and then obviously the big difference between how my mother parented me versus how she was parenting me, me being an 8 or 9 year old child. So.
Was it difficult for you when you navigate homelessness and, now I'm in this structured environment? Was that difficult for you to navigate or to adjust to?
You know what? That not necessarily. What was more difficult for me was just the emotional battle, honestly, between okay. I should have warned you that I was going to cry. The emotional battle between my mother and my grandmother, because it wasn't an easy thing. My grandmother, she tried to let my mom be a parent for as long as she could. Mm-hmm. And my mom tried to be a parent as best she could, given what limited circumstances and given the limited knowledge that she had. And so the emotional struggle of seeing my mom having to step in, my grandmother having to step in and take us. Because again, first of all, she was old and she didn't want to have to raise us. She didn't want to have to raise us. Mm-hmm. And she didn't want to have to take us from her daughter. But she knew that she didn't have any other choice. Mm-hmm. And my mom also knew that she couldn't raise us. But it's so like one of the things I kind of remember very vividly to this day is the day she came and picked us up. And I remember how very sad my mom looked. I remembered it. And it wasn't like it was some like happy, thing. So like for me, we lived me and my mom and my sister, we lived in a shelter downtown for few months, it stayed in a room with a bunch of people. And because again, my grandmother tried to let her parents, she's the one that dropped us off at the shelter. She's like, these are your kids, you have to take them. But when it got to the point where she realized she couldn't, she had to take us. But like that didn't even really phase me. I guess I was probably so used to the instability that came with living with my mom. Like I didn't even, it was normal at that point. I didn't think anything of it. But what was more impactful to me is when like I realized, oh, okay, like this isn't going to be, we're switching places. If this is, I'm actually permanently living with my grandmother, and she's literally taking us away. So to me, that was more of an emotional type situation because I knew that it was hard for my grandmother, and I also knew that it was hard for my mom at the same time. Yeah.
Wow. I can only imagine that that's a real space to be in. Your grandmother happened to make this, I got to make a hard decision, even though I've allowed, I've sat back, I've watched, and, tried to allow my daughter to parent her children. What did school look like for you? Were there a lot of, because I know when you move, every move comes with, that comes with other things, especially when you're school age. What did that look like?
I will say that both my grandmother and even my mom, they were big proponents in my like education. We went to the same church, and a lot of people at our church went to Pattonville. So we lived in the city, and we were in DC, and so a lot of the people in my the like older like teenagers, I guess, or older kids, they were like 4, 5, 6 years older than me. They were at Pattonville School District, and so when my grandmother and my mom saw that, they really wanted to get me into Pattonville School District. And so when I was in the second grade, before then I was at the I was at the school that was by my grandmother's house in Walnut Park. That's what area my grandmother's house in Walnut Park. When I lived with my mom in Ashland, we were at this. I was at Ashland Elementary. We lived off Margaretta, kind of more so on the north side, but like northwest side. And then by the time second grade rolled around, and even though I was still living with my mom, that's when she got me in the DSEG program through Pattonville. And so from there, I just, caught the bus to school. And I stayed in that, like, for her, my mom and my grandmother, that was important for me to be in a good school system and a good school environment. So I didn't really have to, like, jump schools, I would say, that much, because even though I just basically changed bus stops from the bus stops I had when I was living with my mom versus when I had to move in permanently with my grandmother. It was a different bus stop. But fortunately, I was able to be in the same school system, so I didn't have a lot of instability there. So that ended up working out really well, actually.
So good for you. That, because normally what we see is that kids are switching schools a lot. Their records, everything get a little misconstrued when they're moving all the time. What did it look like for your younger sibling? Like, was that hard? How did you guys adjust to all the moving? Like, was that easy? Was it? I know she was a little younger, so
it was easier for me. So my sister, like my uncle, is also mentally disabled and has been, mentally disabled her whole life. The move to my grandma was actually easier for me because through the instability with my mom, I actually, in part, I was responsible for my younger sister, like a lot. With my grandma, I was somewhat responsible, but I did not in the same way. Like for my mom, I would literally be responsible. Like we might be left alone, and I might have to watch my, sister, and as a young child or whatever. With my grandmother, I didn't have that same situation. I was responsible in the way that like a child is responsible for a younger sibling. When I moved with my grandmother, like, okay, you might go run Danielle's backwater. My sister's name is Danielle. Go run her, like that type of like normal stuff. Like you're an older sibling, you do that. Versus when I was with my mom, it was more of almost kind of like a parent-child relationship, so to speak. And sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes it was like that. So for me, when I went to move with my grandmother permanently, that was easier from that aspect, that I really could just be her big sister and I didn't have to like worry about her. Because I knew that my grandparents, had her, and they didn't, need me to do anything. They didn't need me to mother her or parent her. So that was easier for me. As far as my sister's concerned, she didn't have much awareness because of the nature of her condition about what was going on, what was different. She just went with the flow like she still does today. But just for me personally, it was actually easier for me when we moved in with my grandmother.
And then being that now that you're in a strict environment, did it come with any challenges that you see? Because I know at this time you're getting a little bit older. Did it come with any challenges that you foreseen in childhood, like, or were there any just communication breakdowns or anything that you and grandma experienced? Because now I'm getting older and things are changing.
Yes, absolutely. Again, at first, and I don't want to make it seem like, well, I'll just say it and I'll kind of explain it. Like, again, when my grandmother was still just a grandmother, it was like I loved being around her. She would like pick me up on the weekends, take me to Union Station and stuff like that, do all the fun stuff. When she had to go from being a mother, the relationship was very different because she was very strict. And it's like if any child growing up with a very strict parent, especially parent like you're afraid to like do anything wrong because you know she go get your tail, all these type of things. Like I became very more timid and very more uncomfortable because my grandmother was like, you know, she was no nonsense. And I knew I couldn't like fool around and play around with her. And I think that made me at a certain level uncomfortable for a period of time in my childhood because we didn't have that same type of relationship. Mm-hmm. And that combined with the fact that, again, even though I was young, I was aware of what was going on and what burden my grandmother was taking on by bringing me and my sister into the house. And so I certainly felt, even as a young child, an obligation to not mess anything up. Because I'm like, for one, she already is not supposed to do this. Like, this isn't supposed to be her role. And so that made me even more like, okay, I can't make any mistakes. I have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. Because I don't want to hurt, you know, because I saw the hurt that she had, like, both of my grandmother and my mom, but for my grandmother, I saw the hurt, the disappointment, all that. Like, I don't want to do anything else to disappoint her or to make her feel bad or to, you know, make her feel like she's not doing the right thing as a mother, you know, because I know that was part of her experience, feeling like, okay, first of all, my daughter got pregnant at 16 and now she can't, you know, raise these kids. And so I'm sure she had a lot of internal disappointment in herself. And I didn't want to do anything to make that worse. And so I carried a lot of that, like, guilt and baggage growing up. And that affected it too, until I got out of the house. And then me and my grandmother had a great relationship again. It like turned full circle almost, where, you know, because now I'm grown and independent, I didn't need her to mother me. She was she was more so back to being that grandmother, that loving grandmother again. And like, and it just, again, turned. And I thank God for that because that was major for me. But it turned, you know, kind of full circle once I got, and I left the house like with college. I like left and I didn't come back. I wasn't one of the ones that well, I came back for like a good hot second, but not for real. Like I went away to college my freshman year and I came back my sophomore year. And then junior year, I moved on campus, even though I'm still in St. Louis. I moved on campus and I never came back home again. So like I was pretty much growing on my own, you know, 19, 20 years old. And so by the time I hit that age, like I was, you know, very independent and, you know, living on my own, didn't need her support. Like she would have given it to me. I want to say that, like I was very conscious of having to take care of myself because, again, I had been a burden. And I'm saying these are my terms. My grandmother would never call me a burden, but I had been a burden. And I'm using it in the sense that she raised her kids, she wasn't supposed to raise me. So that's what I mean when I say I've been, and I have been that for so long. I was very conscious of like, okay, when I move out, I need to make sure that I am not calling her like, hey, can you give me some money? Hey, can you do this? Because she's already raised 5 kids and raised me, and her journey wasn't going to end. She still had a disabled son, and she still had my sister who was disabled. And so I wasn't going to add on to any more, you know. So like I said, when I came grown and on my own and independent, like our relationship completely changed because it was, again, more of a, you know, grandmother child type relationship. And, you know, call her, we would have great conversations and things like that we didn't have when I was a kid living in our house. And also she's old school and traditional too. So conversations she was gonna have with me when I was an adult, she wasn't gonna have with me as a kid in her house, you know, like, no, I'm not talking. But so I love when our relationship changed. And it also just made me appreciate the relationship we had when I was a kid, because I understood that maybe at the time I didn't understand like why she was so harsh and strict, you know, on a lot of things, but I definitely understood as I got older and definitely appreciated it and knew that listen, if it wasn't for her, I'd be nothing. And so I have that appreciation for it too. But yeah.
Did you ever get therapy?
Yes, actually, after she passed away.
Okay.
After she passed away, nope, I take that back. Not after she passed away. After my grandfather passed away. So my grandmother developed dementia when she was like 79.
Okay.
And what they say when somebody has dementia, they die twice, right? Because her brain and her mind was gone a long time before while she was still on this earth. Mm-hmm. Actually, probably about like 5-6 years. Like her mind was completely gone, didn't know who we were, but she was still living, still taking care of her and everything. But around the time my grandfather passed away, I did get therapy. Sorry, let me go back. My grandmother was sick. My grandmother and my mom had, by this time, my mom had, again, life changed and God blessed it. My mom actually had moved back into the house to take care of my grandmother while she had dementia. And my grandfather, like for a while, it was just them two, my grandmother and me, my mother, and my grandfather taking care of my grandmother because she got to the point where like you literally had to do everything for her. She couldn't walk. She couldn't feed herself. She had to be changed, all that stuff. So my mom kind of came in and she kind of did all the dirty work day to day. My grandfather worked and did the same thing too. And then my Aunt Michelle kind of took care of like medicine needs, doctor's appointments, all that stuff. So it was all kind of hands on deck situation. And all of a sudden, my grandfather got sick. He called us and he was, doing good. And then he one day he was like, I don't feel well. I need to go to the doctor, which for him to get there, he must have had to been really feeling bad. And honestly, he had really been feeling bad for a long time, but he didn't go to the doctor because he was taking care of his wife. And so by the time he got to the doctor, he found out he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer and only a few months to live. And so this whole time, we were kind of mourning my grandmother, and they switched it up. And now I'm like, oh, he's about to die. And he even said that, like he came home. I remember he was in the hospital for a few days before we brought him home and put him on hospice care. And again, you wouldn't have known that he had cancer in probably until like the last 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, not 2 or 3 weeks, sorry, 2 or 3 days, literally, of his life because he was still up moving, taking care of my grandmother, out in his garden, doing all the things. But he came home and I'll never forget the day he came home from the hospital. He was feeding my grandmother and he was telling her, he was like, I thought, you were going to be gone before me. And I was like, I'm going to be gone before you. And so that situation, after that, I'm like, I definitely needed some therapy. It was it was a lot to deal with, going from trying to take care and doing all the things necessary for grandma and making sure that everything was in order for that. And then then now my grandfather all of a sudden is leaving unexpectedly, and then there was a big gap because again him and my mom were really kind of taking care of the day-to-day things for my grandmother. So after that, I definitely did seek therapy and just talk a lot about kind of some of this burden that I had as a child, kind of growing up, even to feel like I can't make any mistakes. I have to do everything the right way. I don't want to bring any embarrassment, like any further embarrassment, on my grandmother. Again, growing up in the church, you got a child that's pregnant at 16. Church people gonna be church people, and I just trying to let her raise her. Then when she couldn't, when we had to live with her, church people gonna be church people, and I didn't want to bring any more embarrassment, gossip, anything on my grandmother. And so I just felt that need to like, okay, I have to be perfect and I have to do things all the right way. And also that was my grandmother's expectation at the same time that I do things the right way. Not that I could make mistakes, but that I do things the right way. And so I did seek therapy at that time so I could really kind of navigate all these emotions and like feelings, now as in my adulthood. So yeah, I absolutely did go to therapy.
And I know church was a big part of your grandmother. I was afraid of your grandmother growing up because she was the no nonsense grandmother, and you were going to be the best usher that you could be. She made sure, right? Like you had to be in uniform. You had to, but it was all people like her that really helped import in us, and I didn't see it then. But now when I look back over my life and I'm just like, I thank God I had a Elder Sanford that cared enough to really dig in deep with us. They didn't just leave us, they showed us and they taught us. What would you say, how was that whole experience with church? And it was no breaks with church. Church was you were going.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you say that. That part of it was crazy enough is like I was almost jealous of the relationship that my grandmother had with the church kids to some extent because she was nicer to you all. Like even though like my grandma was mean to us, but she was no nonsense. But she wasn't like mean to the church kids. And like you all could like have a relationship. I've never like you, Kim, like y'all can kind of joke with her, like, hey, this is kind of laugh and joke with her. Like I did not feel that privilege as like I really could laugh and joke with grandma as a child, but like when I would see like you all kind of have like more of a relaxed relationship with her than I felt like I did. Like I had a little bit of jealousy of that, like kind of growing up. But I also appreciated that at the same time because she knew that like, okay, yes, she's gonna, make sure the kids don't clown and act up, but she didn't overstep any boundaries in how she talked to other people's kids. At church, even though to some extent everybody was our mom, right? We had to make sure we followed doing what everybody told us to do. But she really loved the kids at church. Like she absolutely loved. Oh my God, you and your everybody. Like that's why she was like so like happy you all were ushering. Like she just had nothing but like love and admiration for like all the church kids and just making sure that you all were happy and like ushering and enjoyed your experience or whatever, which was a great experience for us. So like, but honestly, like it was to me, church was a very it was like a break because I was out the house and I felt like my grandmother again, even though people at church, she was no nonsense, but she was a lot more lax in church than she was at home. To me, well, in my experience, like it was, she was a lot more relaxed in church than she was at home. So I could feel like I could breathe a little bit more in church. Like I could relax a little bit more. I could have, fun and talk to my friends. Obviously I knew not to ever get too out of hand and too disrespectful. But I felt like church was like a reprieve for me. Like I enjoyed going to church as a kid, even though you're right, we were there constantly, all the time, sun up to sundown on Sundays. But I enjoyed it. I really did. I think God, my grandmother, for giving me that experience because again, it was a reprieve for me. I really did enjoy and love the experience of going to church as a child.
What would you say would be something that you've noticed that your takeaways that even in adult life, that these are qualities that you only got from your grandmother?
Oh, good and bad. I'm saying good and bad. I my grandmother was a caretaker in every sense of the word. Okay, so not only just me, my sister, her kids, me, my sister, her husband, everybody at church. I'll never forget. I think it was Sister Levi. Sister Levi was sick on dialysis. My grandmother would every day. My grandmother would get off work. She worked up until until she couldn't anymore, until the dementia took her mind away. But every day she'd get off work, she'd go over to Miss Levi's house, make sure she had all of her waters that she needed, would take her food, everything. She literally cared. She was her caregiver. Again, even though she had a job at the time, a husband, a disabled son, two great kids at home, who were still kids at the time, she would take care of Miss Levi. And when Miss Levi passed away, I never forget. She said it was too hard for her to take care of her and then watch her pass away. It was too difficult, too emotional for her. And mind you, she had already done the same thing for her mom and also her dad at this point. I was a kid. We was going back and forth till they were in small town in called England, Arkansas, about an hour outside of Little Rock. We could go down there and take care of her dad. Her mom died when I was 2, but her dad, I remember that she more like 10 or 11. He passed away when I was 10 or 11. And so, but she would go down there as often as she could. Her and her sister from Chicago took care of her dad until he passed. Watched her do it with Sister Levi, took care of Sister Levi until she passed. She said she would never do that again. And then Sister Hope, I said, and I watched her do it again for Sister Hope every day. She got off work, if she was supposed to do, she would go take her sister home, go take her food. Because my grandmother was a caregiver in every sense of the word. And I have that same spirit. Like I feel the need to take care of everybody. And my husband and I joke, since we had our house built in 2008. And it's for most of the time that we have had our house, but somebody else lived in the house with us. Who are not our kids. Like no, somebody else has lived in the house with us. Like several people now at this point have lived in our house. Because I that caregiver nurturer spirit. That's in me from my grandmother, and I know that's in me from my grandmother. So I would say that because, and also, my grandmother was one of 15 kids, only 2 girls, 13 boys. She was the first girl born after I think there were 6 or 7 boys. Then it was her. So her brother, they all called her sister. So growing up, everybody called her sister. She had to take care of all of them, the older ones and the ones that came after her. She was the caregiver because, first her mom, like, finally I got my girl, we're living down south. You helping me raise these kids. So my grandmother would tell me the story all the time of how at the time she was 12 years old, anything her mom knew how to cook, she knew how to cook at 12 years old, which is why my grandmother was such a fantastic cook. But she knew how to do all those things. So literally from the time she was a child, she did nothing but take care of people up until the day that she could not literally do it anymore. So that I definitely have that caregiver spirit. And again, took care of people even when it was inconvenient for her. I have that too. So I will say that the downside, my grandmother's lack of patience. I have that. My kids will tell you, and my husband will tell you that I have that too in me. So it's something that I try to be conscious about because I'll see that I'm like, ooh, that sounds just like Ethel. That's stuff that she would have done, and so I have to dial it back, every now and then. But again, that's in me from watching her being in that house and watching how she ran her household and everything. So that's in me. But I would say, first and foremost, my grandmother was a caregiver. She wanted to take care of people. She wanted to take care of things, even at the church. She wanted to oversee, that's how you come to usher. You want to make sure everybody is welcome. Everybody is taken care of in the church. That was just in her. And so that's definitely, absolutely in me, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
I always laugh because Latike's grandmother name was Ethel. My grandmother name was Ethel. And I can just see so many similarities in these two ladies.
That Ethel. Yeah,
Wow. They had the same first and middle name. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, both Ethel.
Wow, Ethel. Yeah, so that must have been an older type thing to name your children Ethel and then give them Lee.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So what things do you know that you do with your kids that I definitely learned this from my grandmother. I got this and I adopted this habit or this, even if it's, do you cook like her? Do you, what are the things?
They probably wish I did. I would say education. Like even though, and probably because she was not able to have a formal education, she was very particular about me making sure that education was important and that I prioritized it above everything else. Even though I was active and stuff, so like my kids, I was advanced, I was in all of those things. She wanted to make sure that my grades and everything were very, very important because she knew, again, from her experience growing up poor and just seeing how hard it is to thrive in a society, even be functional without a lack of education. She really wanted me to be solid in my education. So that is a big proponent of what is important for me and my kids. And then also respect for adults. Like I'm very much so like and it's weird because I don't my kids they call me by my first name all the time. They'll come up my house, T, which is totally fine. Doesn't bother kids at church, but T doesn't bother me. I don't allow my kids to do that. And again, not because I think it's wrong, but it's just the way I was raised. Like I can't stand to see my kids where I call somebody, hey Sharon, no ma'am, but Miss Sharon, something like I don't I just if that's your auntie, cousin Sharon, like something, put something in front of it. So that I think traditional sense, of just teaching them how to be respectful. And just some that again, that kind of traditional sense of how the way to do things is I definitely get that from my grandmother. And I make sure that my kids kind of follow that same path as well. So I would say that probably just like education and then just respectful, just doing the traditional things that most kids your age might not do it. Again, I don't have any problem with it, but for me and my kids, I just want them to have a certain level of like structure that we don't commonly see, now out in society. So, yeah.
Living with your grandmother, being that she was older in age and stepping into this reparenting role, were there any services or anything that you think that maybe you guys could have benefited from if they were available?
I would say one thing I know that she really struggled with is when it came time for me to go to college, because she didn't really have that experience with her kids. Like my aunt Michelle went to college, but like I went through like for a while, but I went through like a full experience where I had to go to different college campuses and like apply for scholarship. I don't really know anything about that. She know anything about applying for scholarships or FAFSA or anything like that. And so she definitely could have benefited from that because I literally had to figure that out by myself. Like I had to fill out my own FAFSA. Like now parents fill it out. Like I had to figure out. I'm like, grandma, can you give me your tax forms? I had to. So I'm like 17, 18, learning about taxes. I'm like, can you give me your tax forms? I had to fill out this stuff for the FAFSA and figure out, how I could get money for college. But she didn't know how to do any of that, and she also couldn't provide me with any money for college, and she couldn't, really didn't know anything about the process. So I think that's one huge thing that, like, especially older grandparents, especially if they don't have the experience of like having one of their kids go through the college process, she definitely could have used that type of service for me. I will say too, being that she raised my sister who's disabled, the her experience of raising a disabled granddaughter was a lot different from raising a disabled son. And part of that was because there are different types of like this. Like, Steve, my uncle Steve, he was disabled, but he was somewhat like functional. Like he can go catch the bus by state or metro, whatever they call it now. He was able to do that like by himself. He didn't have to be watched constantly. He was able to work. He worked for the church for a long time. He was able to be, even though he was mentally disabled, he kind of had more so the intelligence of like a 16, 17-year-old versus my sister, who had the mental intelligence of maybe like a 5 or 6-year-old. And so for her, she did a lot more services, support, care. Like Steve was able to go to like he went to Sumner, whatever regular school. He just was in the special needs class. My sister was all, she was in a special school district. And so she had, and that was a process. And actually even the process of like Social Security, all the things that she was required to fill out. So I would say for any grandparent who has to raise a special needs child, like that's a process in and of itself, and just things you don't understand, and kind of additional support you would need. Because like when I had to take over guardianship of both my sister and my uncle, it was a lot of things that I realized. I was like, oh crap, like we didn't do any, like a lot of stuff got messed up along the way that I had to like kind of go back and fix, because like she didn't know any better. So I think those type of services would have been really good, and financial services. Like I'm fortunate that my grandparents were good stewards, good financial stewards. They didn't like waste money, and they make sure we were provided for. But they certainly could have benefited a lot more, and probably could have really even on limited salary, really could have left the nest egg had they had any experience or knowledge about finances, which they did. They just knew how to put money in a savings account. They didn't know anything like outside of it. And like I said, thank God they were good financial stewards, and they didn't like, waste money or whatever. They were very conservative in terms of how they, made their dealings, and they made sure business bills and everything were always taken care of. But like financial support, especially now that you're raising 2 kids who didn't, that you weren't anticipating on raising it. And my sister came with, obviously because she was disabled, she got Social Security, she got extra funding, so she wasn't a financial burden in that way. But I was, because I didn't get what little bit of child support I got was nothing at all nothing at all that she could use to raise kids. So financial support. Because my grandmother, she could, and I think too, she didn't even realize that. I know this now only because my husband is a social worker. He works with foster kids. He manages a foster department of a nonprofit. She didn't know that she could have put me in the system, and the state would have paid at least some financial benefit. Like she didn't know that. And so just all of those things, like how she could have gotten more resources and support for me. Like she didn't know. She just literally just went from not living with her on a Friday to moving in with her on a Monday, and she just did what she had to do. So,
And so when you hear about like nonprofits like the one like Grandma here stepping up to kind of fix this divide and be in the gap, and so those are reasons why I asked, like, what services do you guys think they maybe you could have benefit from or you would like to see? And then what challenges do you see today that, like, that grandparents are challenged against versus maybe your grandmother didn't have that experience, or maybe times were just different? What challenges would you say today that you may see that grandparents may have today, or maybe it was back then, and maybe it's still a continuation today?
yeah, I think there are different challenges, because my grandmother, she the things that she didn't have to think about that people, anybody raising a child today has to think about. Like my grandmother didn't have to worry about like social media stuff like that, phone track, none of that. She didn't have to worry about. So it's like a whole new age. I don't even know, like if we had Facebook or whatever. Like I don't even know how she would have functioned. And so for a grandparent, you think for a grandparent now who doesn't know anything about Facebook, social media, but they got grandkids who are on it, just learning about that. Okay, well, how can I track to make sure I know what my kids do? Because like I know I monitor my kids, social media use. If my son doesn't use social media, he's not old enough now. My daughter's in high school; she has some limited access, but I monitor that. And I would doubt that somebody that's 20, 30 years older than me who's raising grandkids, or even maybe 10, 15 years older than me raising grandkids, they wouldn't know that. So they need that type of support. Like, how do I parent, especially a teenager, right? How do I parent a teenager in today's world? Like, what supports can I need with that? And as far as raising little kids, now there's so many different things that kids can do, activities. So like the only activities I was involved in were like activities through my school that I signed up for. It would would have been a great benefit for me to like play sports and do something else. But again, I think I was in Girl Scouts for a couple of years. But other than that, my grandmother didn't know about like signing me up for different stuff like that. So I think that's important. Like, making sure that a child is well balanced. They're not just, going to school and coming home. But do they have any interest? Do they want to play football, baseball, basketball, or do they want to be like my son is? He goes to rock band. He's in STEM and coding. Stuff like that. That again didn't even exist since when we were kids. So, our grandparents certainly would know about it. And so, like, okay, tell me resources about like extracurricular activities that I can get my child in to help them get ahead. Academic support in schools, I would say too, because not one day in life did my grandmother ever help me with homework, or could she have? She didn't even get to go to middle school, right? So fortunately, I had some level of intelligence enough that I was able to, do well in school academically, and I went to a really good school too. Again, that's because of my grandmother. She wanted me to go out into a good school so that I could have academic support. I had amazing teachers and counselors. So when I needed support, I got it from my school. But a lot of grandparents don't have that. Their great kids are not in good school, like not in good school environments. They need extra academic support, and they are not in a position to help. Especially now, these kids get past third grade. You don't know the math is new. You don't know what's going on. So I would say that too, like academic support, like figuring out how can I raise a well-rounded child who can exceed well academically in school, and then as they get older, to really help them get the tools to navigate life, because the tools that they needed and that we need to navigate life and get into our adulthood are going to be completely different than the tools that even now my kids need to navigate adulthood and get into life. So I would say kind of resources centered around that.
Yeah, I definitely can see that because I can't even imagine just navigating even at my age, and then being someone who is older than us that are having these challenges with the school system. How are we with time? Okay. And and then when we think about school extracurriculum activities to just help kids have that well-roundedness to exposure, because just navigating foster care, the system, thankfully that wasn't our part of our story, but it very well could have been. And to just navigate that, it's got to be hard for any grandparent. What advice would you, if you were to just offer any words of encouragement, any advice to a grandparent who is, maybe this is their situation, they're suffering in silence because, right, nobody likes to talk about that my child, failed at parenting, or to even have that stigma about they're not taking care of their kids like I took care of them. What do we say to parents, to grandparents, to help them get past that?
I would say number one thing is that to put your pride to the side. That has to be the number one thing, and know that even though you don't know something, first of all, don't be ashamed too. Like you don't let shame and embarrassment get in the way of you being a good parent or whatever role grandparent that you're stepping into. But also, even if you don't know something, I assure you there is somebody who who can put you in touch with somebody who knows what it is. And I give this example all the time when I tell people about how I ended up in law school and made my law school choice. My grandmother was a housekeeper for her, most of my adulthood and childhood and adulthood. She was a housekeeper. She cleaned, not at hotels, but she cleaned rich white families out in Clayton, Ladue, in that area. That's what she did. She cleaned. She was their housekeeper. When it came time for me to go to law school, navigating college was hard enough because I was the first generation college graduate. Law school was even more of a challenge, right? And so when I went to college, again, first year I went off to Indiana University, picked that college for all the wrong reasons, which is why I came back and went to St. Louis University after that. But I lost out on a lot because had I went to SLU as a freshman, I would have had a lot of financial aid that I couldn't get as a transfer student. And I didn't want to make that same mistake going to law school. I wanted to make sure that I picked the law school that was best for me, and I knew that I needed help. But I knew that I didn't know anybody in my family that could help me. And so I reached out to my grandmother because I knew that, especially by this time, she wasn't, that guard of pride and like she had let all that down. And part of it because now I was in college, now she can brag on me too, right? But like, but all that was down. And I was like, listen, grandma, like I need to figure out what law school I'm going to go to. I know these rich people that you work for, they have lawyers in the family. I need you to connect me with one of them so I can figure out what to do. And she did. She went out to her bosses, again, because it's somebody's family. Her boss's brother was a lawyer, very successful lawyer here in downtown St. Louis. He took me out to lunch. And again, that's what I said. Don't be afraid to, because people will help you. And I think that's what people get past that stigma. You know, people, this man had never met me. And then it's like, her boss didn't like know me like that. But they loved my grandmother because she worked for their family for so long. And I'm like, of course, this man picked me here to pay for my lunch, went to a nice restaurant downtown and gave me great advice about what college and what law school I should attend. And help me navigate that whole process and made a connection, a networking connection for me and for future employment. And I got that from my grandmother who didn't have an 8th grade and, didn't even have a middle school education. She was the one that was able to make that connection for me. And so I tell, so I would say to anybody, first of all, you have to put that embarrassment, that pride and everything to the side and know that you need to, especially if you're stepping into a realm of parenting a child who is not your own, you are going to need a village of support like never before. And you might not know where to get that support from. You might not know who that village might be. But I guarantee you know somebody who can reach out and who can put you in contact with, okay, you can get this from such and such, or get that from such and such. The St. Louis, despite, all the negativity that surrounds the city sometimes, it does have a lot of great resources here. There's a lot of great resources. There's a lot of people willing to help. I put myself out there all the time. I tell anybody, if you know anybody who wants to be a lawyer, especially, a young Black woman, because that's my story, that's my experience, from the city of St. Louis or anybody, please put them in contact with me. I want to talk to them. I want to take them out to lunch. I want to help guide them through that process because that's what was done for me, right? And so I'm very intentional about giving back and being that support. But like those type of people like me exist all over the city in different professions, working for different jobs. Like there are so many resources that people can get a hold to, but you have to ask. And in order to ask, you have to put down that pride and accept the help too. I would say that too. Don't just accept the help. Because sometimes somebody might give you help and it might be overwhelming. Like, wait, don't do all. No, accept it, right? And accept it. And when you get in a position, then return the favor. When you get in a position, return the favor. So that's what I would say. That's my biggest thing is to really just to put the pride aside and then just seek the help and just put yourself out there and ask.
Wow. It's been amazing to just know Latique, to see us grow and transform. I think with society and the statistics around kids who grow up without one parent homes or who grow up without either parent in the home, what do you say to that? What is your response to that? Being that you have against all odds, because you have broken some odds, and we know the statistics around what they say, what everybody else is saying about kids who don't grow up with, or kids who were even parented by a single mom. We know the statistics around this. So what do you say to that, and to encourage any young person who maybe faced with some challenges, or maybe their story is going to be, I was raised by somebody other than my biological parent?
Yeah, I would say first know that it's possible, right? First know that it's absolutely possible. But I'll also say that you have to be in the right environment. For all that I went through as a child, ultimately being with my grandmother was the best environment for me. And I tell like my story could have been so much worse if I had been in a different situation. Like, but God, right? Like I just I can't even, like, when I see people like, yeah, what I went through as a child was sad, but at the same time, it could have been so much worse had I not had a grandmother who loved me enough to take me in and have me in a stable environment. And in an environment where she could provide for me. When I was with my grandmother, I didn't have to worry about whether or not the lights was going to be disconnected or not. Again, not because she was rich, because she wasn't. Like, we were still very poor, but at the same time, she was a good financial steward. So they were, and my grandpa, they were providers. So they knew it, especially by this time, now they've raised their kids. Now my mom and her siblings, they might have a different story to tell because my grandparents, they moved to St. Louis and they lived in half of a basement. They couldn't even afford a whole basement. They rented half of a basement and raised their kids up until they were able to, buy a house and all those things. But by the time it came to raising me, they were stable, okay, in their finances. Again, not well off, not even middle class, but they were stable enough to have me in a stable environment, and they cared about my education and making sure that I was in the right school, environment, because again, they knew that they could not provide me with the level of education, and they knew that even in the neighborhood that we were in, that neighborhood school, well, not that it was awful, but that I could get a much better education, which is unfortunate reality of the city of St. Louis. A lot of times they couldn't afford to me to go to private school, but they knew that, okay, she can get a better education if she goes out into this, this school district or whatever. So the fact that I was in a good environment, like, meant everything. Like, that kind of helped me understand that it was possible, because I knew that, that it was, that I was surrounded by people who I was, seeing being successful, even at church, watching everybody go to Pattonville. I'm like, oh, they doing good. They going off to college. And that's part of the reason why she wanted me in that school district. So she going here, she getting good grades. Like, you can go here, you can do this, you can go off to college. But again, had my grandmother not been involved in community and church, she wouldn't have known that, and wouldn't have seen that experience too, for herself. So first, you have to know what's possible, but you have to be intentional about who you surround and your now grandkids you're raising. What environment do you have them in? And to the kids who are out there, like, who might not, be in the best environment, because even though grandmother's taking them in, they might still be struggling. Like, whatever resource you can get a hold to, again, church, community center, school counselors, like, there is somebody out there in this world who is willing to help you, and just know that it's possible. You can defy odds. You can, exceed expectations. And I was also fortunate enough to have grandparents. A lot of times people raise kids and it's like they don't teach their kids that I actually want you to be better than me, and I want you to do better than me. And I had that mentality. I was raised with them, and my grandparents wanted me to be better than them. They didn't want me to have the same struggles that they had. They didn't want me to have the same struggles that their kids had. They wanted me to be better. And because that was instilled in me, that helped a lot too. So even as a very, very young child, I knew that I didn't want my children to be raised in the same level of poverty that I was raised in. I didn't want to have to worry about their neighborhoods and their schools. Like, I didn't want them to have to worry about the stuff that my grandparents had to worry about. So with that said, like, I think just knowing that, first of all, it's possible, that there are people who have overcome it, but you really have to be in the right environment and surround yourself with the right resources. And if you do that, the sky's the limit. Really, the sky is the limit. If anything, I will say that my experience has opened up doors for me that wouldn't have been possible except through my experience. Like, my college essay, I mean, not college, my law school essay was about my childhood and being raised, and how I was raised, and all the things I was able to overcome. That got me in law school, got me a full ride to scholarship in the law school, got me lots of scholarships and things, and just knowing that experience. And then, so for me, just knowing, you can do it, and use that as your testimony, as your success story, to help build and go on to the next thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an awesome story, Latique. I'm always amazed, just to know you, Latique. I had the privilege of growing up with her, and though our story was very similar in nature, but to see her successful and to see her raising her kids and doing well and thriving, it makes my heart glad, to know that, um, there's still a chance for you. There's still, regardless of what life throws at you, because nobody get to pick their parents. Nobody get to pick, your parents didn't get to pick what kind of children they would have, but God. And I appreciate you for I reached out, you didn't hesitate, you gave me a yes, and sharing your story with the world, because this is a lived thing. It's not something that I can hide from, or to say it didn't happen, because it was lived. It was a lived experience. So I really appreciate you sharing your story with us and Grandma's Hands. I felt the need as a social worker. I've spent time navigating social work and child welfare. I too have served kids in foster care. I do see the divide. I've seen the divide. I know what it's like to just leave those kids with grandma and say, here you go, and it shuts the door. But who's checking on them in the days to come, in the weeks to come, and the months to come? So I've decided to do something about that. So that's why we've created Grandma's Hands. Um, in to be a resource, a place of refuge, and not only just for the grandchildren, but for also the grandparents who never talk about the real struggles, the or the burden. They, you didn't even say that. Your grandmother didn't say that, but that's how you saw it as I'm a burden. And what other just to think about some kid is holding on to something and they're not even expressing that they too may feel like that they are a burden or that they are being put into a different to see the different dynamics in your grandmother's relationship of she's not just the grandmother who picks us up on the weekends now, but she's actually mom. Did that title change for you at all? Did you guys call? What did you call grandma?
I know I still call her grandma.
Grandma.
Yeah, I still
Okay.
call her grandma.
Okay.
And she never expected it.
Okay.
Like I said, she understood my mother's struggles, and even through frustration, she still honored my mom as my mom. And just to tell you how God redeems all too, because this is the important part of the story and my story, is that like that God really does redeem all.
Mhm.
And when my grandmother passed away, I told my mom, I said, you should not have any guilt about it, because when your mom needed you the most, when she could no longer take care of herself because dementia had her mind, you were there changing her diapers, feeding her. My mother literally gave my grandmother her last drink of water right before she took her last breath. I said, don't feel any guilt about what happened, because I know that my mom does, right? I said, don't feel it, because when you were there, when your mother needed you the most, you were right there for her. And that's how God redeems all. That's how things come full circle. So, it even through dysfunction, and I learned this from my grandmother and just growing up in church, like knowing that experience, like even through dysfunction, like even through turmoil and what seems like to be, again, a situation could have been totally different. Like I still see the joy in it. I still see the God in the situation. And I was right there watching my mother give my grandmother her last drink of water before she took her final breath. Like I saw the symbolism in that, and the God just realized, like, he redeems all. Like all is forgiven, no matter what the mistakes was made, no matter what the disappointment was. Like ultimately, he loves, he accepts, he forgives, and he gives us grace to get past it and live through that situation. So, for me, it's just like you, the grandparents, or like my grandmother. Again, I am nothing, 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 nothing without her. I'm so grateful for her and everything that she has done for me, and I'm just grateful for the life that she lived and all that she instilled. But I'm also grateful for the lessons that I'm still learning, that my mother is still learning from her, and that I'm still learning too. So,
Wow. What an awesome testimony, Latique. Your story is gonna help. I it just blessed me today. And I'm sorry, yeah, I'm a crybaby. um, but I know that there's some kids out there and there's some grandparents. Your labor is not in vain. Um, no, you may not be a social worker like me. You may not be a lawyer like Latique, but your grandparents and the people in your life that God has placed in your life for whatever reason and for whatever your story is, he can still get glory and he still has use of you. So I do, Latique, in our final minutes, if you would like to just encourage families or what would you like to say? Um, I just want to thank you again for just coming to share your story.
I think you summed it up perfectly. Because those were the words I was looking for. Like your labor is not in vain. To every grandparent, to every biological parent, for whatever reason, you didn't end up able to take care of your child, and you had to drop them off with grandpa. Your story isn't over. God can still redeem for for the grandparents that looks like, oh, I signed up for another 18 years of having to take care of a child. Like your labor is not in vain. God redeems. He redeems the time. He redeems all. I think about, like, man, what if my mother would have had a completely different life? And what if she wouldn't have been able to be there for my grandmother, in her time? you know, when she needed her most. So it just, you never know how things turn out. But, like my household was a very much, we keep God first type of household. And even through everybody's struggle, my grandparents, my mom, everybody's struggle, we kept God first. And what does the Bible say? You raise up a child in the way that they should go. When they go old, they won't depart from it, right? And that's consistent, right? No matter what my mom struggled through, when she got older, she knew what her place was, that she was supposed to come back home and live and take care of her mother, right? And I'm raising my kids in the same way. Things that were instilled in me. The lessons that I learned, even my children, even though they didn't know my grandmother because she passed away when they were, young, they didn't have that experience, they're going to have a lived experience through her, through the values and knowledge that she gave me. I'm passing down to them. It's like I said, your labor is not in vain. The generational curses can change the generational blessings. And that's what we have to believe in order to move forward.
Wow. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to tune in with us today to hear Latike's story. This is part 2 of our series that we are doing on a grandmother's love. I did say in the beginning, whether you're watching this on a replay or you're watching us live now, we would ask that you would be sensitive to the shared information because these are real stories and real lived experiences. I do want to thank you for tuning in. Please continue to support our efforts as we continue to bring real experience because we would like to bring awareness to this population because it is some kid's story, and whether it's yours or whether it's someone regardless of situation and how kids end up in these situations, they are real stories. And so we want to thank you for taking time to tune in with us. Stay tuned for all of Grandma Hand's events and things to come. All right, have a great day.